Well, welcome back to Diverse Joy, a podcast that infuses science, practical skills, and most of all, joy into diversity discussions. My co-host is the colorful and effervescent Dr. William Cox.
And my co-host is the charming and summery Dr. Amber Nelson.
Yay! So as we start out, we always like to start out with our joys.
So yeah, Amber, what's bringing you joy this summer?
So I know this is going to sound really silly, but one of my favorite, I always like to do like, what am I trying to say? Icebreakers, you know, when I'm in groups. And one of my favorite ones is actually shared with me by my partner in my nonprofit, Bryce Cofield, which is like, what is something that you like to geek out on? And currently my geek out is insurance commercials, which I know it sounds ridiculous and silly, but hear me out. I love them because I think that they have to be so incredibly creative because the idea of insurance is so boring.
No offense to anyone out there who's in the insurance field. No offense
to insurance sales people or those that are in insurance, but I think that the idea of insurance is pretty like less interesting. So the commercials have to be, you know, next level in order to get people to be interested. But I mean, think about it. You've got like Flow from Progressive.
I feel like you have some Flow from Progressive energy.
I totally have Flow from Progressive energy for sure. But there's like Flow from Progressive. There's Dr. Rick from Progressive, the Don't Become Your Parents. There's the Geico Gecko, the Geico Caveman. There's Jake from State Farm. There's like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Like there's so many.
Jake from State Farm.
I love
Jake
from
cutie.
He's so cute.
I just had a Facebook memory come up today about the time that I was like, why is that guy on the phone with Jake from State Farm at 3 a.m. for no real reason?
Right. I love it. It's so true. They're just so good. You've got the Allstate Mayhem guy. You've got
I think we talked off the camera with someone about the salt and pepper.
Push it. Yeah. Insurance. I'm just telling you. There's Liberty Mutual, the Limu Emu and Doug. There's so many of them, and so
it's a new genre of media you like to watch.
100%. So next time you're watching an insurance commercial, just
think of
me and appreciate. I mean, even like the General is an insurance, and they used to be super super cheesy with like a little cartoon General, but now they're really good. They kind of like.
Don't they still have the cartoon General?
They still do, but mostly Shaq is the Shaquille O'Neal is the main one for those, and they kind of just play on the fact that like they used to be really cheesy and that people thought that they were like a fake thing. And so anyway, they are just so much fun, and every time I see a new creative insurance commercial, it just fills my heart with joy. So
our insurance, our Grumman's and mine for our house and our cars is USAA.
All right.
So they don't really do commercials.
I don't know if I know any USAA.
I just feel like I need to shout them out since you named every other brand.
I know. Well, there's even like Nationwide is on your side. So I mean, there's so many.
Do you have a playlist of their jingles?
Jingles.
You play it to help yourself go to sleep.
Help myself go to sleep. Calm myself down at the end of the day. Yeah.
I like the ones with the flow person.
Yeah.
And like there was one where it was like her and her family, but she played all the characters in her family.
Yeah. She's got the ones with her sister now. Yeah. And and I forget his name, but now they're kind of. There's another person from Progressive that they're starting to like kind of inch in as a star. So I forgot his name, but I think it's Jesse. That's Jesse from
so it's not
Progressive.
I guess he's just remembering.
Yeah, so. Jesse from Progressive, and he's just kind of quirky and fun. So anyway, insurance commercials. If anybody, I'm just telling you, take a moment to appreciate what artistry we have in these insurance commercials. Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Will?
So one thing that my friends and I and Eric Roman do pretty much every summer is go and see a play at a place called the American Players Theater in Spring Green, Wisconsin. This is a really, really nice and pretty well-known theater company. The actors they get are from Broadway, are from television. So in the play that we saw last year, a couple of the actors were from shows on HBO.
Wow.
And so you get these really top tier actors who come to this theater in Wisconsin to hone their craft and work with these other great actors. So they do lots of they do Shakespeare plays, Tennessee Williams, all the kind of big kind of classic theater stuff. And so last year we saw Much Ado About Nothing, which is my favorite Shakespeare play. It's just so funny and goofy and silly. One of my favorite quotes from it, my friend Jack and I, we kind of say it to each other all the time. So there's two characters that end up in love and they end up married and together, but they start off hating each other and they've kind of hated each other their whole lives. And so when the gentleman comes up and is greeting his nemesis lady, he calls her Lady Disdain,
Disdain.
to express his disdain for her.
Yes.
And he says his way of saying hello is, Lady Disdain, are you yet living?
Ooh,
I say you're still alive?
You're still alive. You're still around.
And so Jack and I say that to each other
That's
sometimes.
hilarious.
We throw that, Lady Disdain, are you yet living?
I love that.
But yeah, this theater company, it's always a good time. They're kind of out in nature. So they have two theaters. One that's indoors for when, inclement weather or whatever. You can still be inside or air conditioned. But their main theater is outdoors. And we were at one play and it started raining, but they kept going. And that, just gave it an interesting, fun dynamic.
It's professional, consummate professionals here.
Yeah. And they, so it's, theater in the rounds, like in Shakespeare's time with open air and all that. They do just a really good job of everything. They, sometimes take Shakespeare plays and set them in the 1920s. And they also are really good about representation. There's always great racial diversity, and they find little interesting ways to bring in sexual orientation kinds of diversity, like switching the gender of a character where it's not going to mess up all the lines too much.
Yeah.
And they do it kind of, so in an episode a long while ago, we mentioned from the 90s, the Brandy Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella, where it was like the prince, he was played by a Filipino actor, his mom was Whoopi Goldberg, his dad was a white guy, so the kind of racial genetics just weren't a factor in this fictional mixed race world, and this theater does that a lot too. So when we saw Much Ado, it was an Asian female lead, and her uncle was black and another uncle was white, and just kind of race doesn't matter. Yeah. And you would think that would be hard sometimes because in those kinds of comedies of errors, you have to track who's the sister and who's the cousin and who's mother and who's father. But actually, it's pretty easy.
Yeah. One also, I think sometimes people overemphasize it in a time period, like a period pieces, like Much Ado About Nothing, or like Shakespeare feels very much like, oh, we have to stick to white historical folks. Accuracy and people that if you're gonna have money or anything, then it had to be white people, right? So I love that there's that mix and giving folks it not being about that, just about the story itself. And
like Bridgerton's kind of another example of kind of that, not exactly the same because they keep kind of family racial stuff making genetic sense. But still kind of finding ways to bring that to it. Keeps it fresh too.
Yeah. And our producer is telling us that the late Wall Street Journal drama critic, and I'm not sure if I know how to pronounce his name, Terry Teachout, called it the finest classical theater festive in the United States. So
wow,
it sounds like APT is a pretty distinguished opportunity for you all.
Yeah, it's just always a good time, always amazing. So we'll try to schedule maybe when you come for another episode, we can figure out a way where we can also do that. You know,
that would be amazing.
Your trips are always busy for us recording this stuff,
but
true. We'll try to squeeze more in.
Squeeze more in. Yes, I love it.
All right, so this month is BIPOC Mental Health Month. So this is July, which is BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month. And so we're going to bring that into what we're talking about in today's episode. So we're going to be looking at kind of biases and prejudice and their kind of effects on mental health. So because we're talking about mental health, we just want everyone to be aware, kind of a content notice that we're going to be talking about things that will sometimes include things like self-harm and suicide. Just in case that's a sensitive topic for any of you, just know that will come in and out of our conversation this episode.
Yes. When before we get started, I was just going to share some of just a few stats and then kind of go into some of the conversation.
Yeah, please.
So just as a kind of framing, right? So Black and Latinx folks have higher rates of persistent symptoms of emotional distress and have less access and resources to actually receive mental health care. So 33 to 36% actually receive the care that they need as compared to 60% of their non-Hispanic white counterparts.
Wow.
For Asian Americans, we see that they have lower rates of mental health utilization and are actually 3 times less likely to seek services. And then we also are seeing high rates of some of the highest rates of suicidality and psychological distress in Native American and Alaskan Native populations. Oh. And one of the things around suicidal ideation and suicide is that it historically has been predominantly those from dominant culture, so white folks, but we've seen in the last 5 years a dramatic increase in suicide attempts and rates in Black youth specifically. Aww. So they actually have the highest rates of suicide attempts than any other demographic. And so when we're talking about BIPOC mental health awareness, these are some of the things that we're talking about, like this rise and managing psychological distress and emotionality, as well as, which then can result in suicidology, and also lack of access to mental health support as well.
Yeah. And not just with people of color, but we know women have higher rates of depression and mental health issues than men. Yep. LGBT folks compared to straight folks, and on and on. Just in general, if you're a member of a stigmatized group, the stats say that you're going to be more likely to face some of these things. And this was actually a big chapter in my research career. So I want to tell you a little bit about kind of this big theoretical model and paper that I published. So when you're in graduate school, you take a lot of courses that are in your kind of core topic area. So for me, that's social psychology, bias, all of that kind of stuff. But you also take classes in other areas. Right. And so I was taking a clinical psychology class really just to check a box because I needed to get a certain number of classes in areas outside my own. But it was an amazing class by a professor named Lynn Abramson, who's a fairly famous depression researcher. And in that class, the final paper, we were allowed to write about basically whatever we wanted, topic related to depression. And throughout this class, as we learned kind of cognitive models of depression. So there are different types of depression, different kind of, some people, there's just a chemical imbalance that doesn't have the same kind of cognitive causes to the depression. Mm-hmm. But for some people, they have more kind of cognitive depression, which is things like they've learned to have negative thoughts about themselves, like I'm stupid, I'm fat, I'm ugly, and that kind of drives their major depression. Mm-hmm. And as we were learning about this, I was like, okay, so they learn these kind of cognitive patterns. These cognitive patterns, they get automatically activated. They bias your attentional processes. They have emotional consequences and so on. Really, these are the same things that I study as a stereotyping and prejudice researcher.
Right.
So stereotypes, they're these automatically activated cognitive patterns. They bias attention processing. They have emotional consequences. And so this kind of unintentional bias that we talk about all the time on this podcast, I said in my final paper for this class, I was like, really kind of these processes in depression and these processes in prejudice or bias are essentially the same in terms of what they are kind of in the brain and how they operate. And so because of that, we could use techniques from clinical psychology, like cognitive behavioral therapy, and apply it in the context of reducing bias and prejudice, and vice versa. And so this was my, I was like, got to get this paper done for a class. I had other classes. I was a busy grad student. But the professor, Lynn Abramson, who's also my dear friend now, really responded to that idea and thought it was great. And as you know, you grade papers or have been in positions where you have to grade papers. You got to get through everyone's paper, give them some nice comments. Yeah. She wrote like a page and a half of comments about how excited she was about this idea and that we should pursue it as an actual project. And so we did. So for a few years, me, Lynn Abramson, also my PhD advisor, Trish Devine, and also we brought in a famous CBT researcher, Steve Holland. And built this kind of theoretical model where we brought in all this stuff from the prejudice literature and all this stuff from the depression literature and kind of made an integrated model. And where that comes into what today's topic is all this research on how members of stigmatized groups, they have higher rates of depression. It's similar to people who aren't a member of a stigmatized group and have this depression. So if you have these negative thoughts about yourself, it results in kind of these cognitive depressions. But for members of stigmatized groups, others are having the negative thoughts about you. They're expressing negativity towards you. You're hearing it from the media. So it might not, in all cases, be driven by negative thoughts you have about yourself, but by negative things you hear about your group all the time.
Right.
And so we were able to really unpack this, and it ended up having a lot of interesting theoretical implications. If any of you are really interested in the scientific details or mental health stuff, check out my paper. I'm very proud of it. It really formed the foundation for all of my work. We'll have a link to it in the episode description. Cox et al. 2012, published in Perspectives on Psychological Science. But really this link, basically prejudice, bias, oppression, these things that we talk about all the time on the podcast, they cause depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues, not through any fault and also I'm not saying that for other people, mental health is their fault, but not through any cognitive things that are necessarily present in members of the stigmatized groups, but just by the nature of them facing prejudice out in the world. And I don't know if you have stuff on that. I can go on forever.
And I think I've mentioned this a few times already this season in particular, but that's, that racial battle fatigue, right? Yes. That's the cumulative effects of these small and large daily interactions that kind of dig at you, that then impact our stress levels, that then impact our psychological well-being as well as our social well-being, right? And kind of biopsychosocial perspective on how our well-being overall. And so those kind of daily cumulative impacts of negative perceptions on ourselves is what then leads to a lot of the negative mental health impacts.
Yeah. So another thing with this is, as we talk about kind of every episode or have talked about many times, everyone learns biases, right?
Yep.
And sometimes we learn biases about a group we're not a part of, but later could become a part of. So for instance, little kids, we know they learn predominant stereotypes about different social groups. But if they end up being LGBT, for instance, so little kids have stereotypes, have biases, have prejudices about the LGBT plus community, but we don't really figure that out until puberty or a little before puberty. And so if you think you have this kind of prejudice or bias going outwards towards what would be an out group, I'm a little kid, I probably, maybe maybe not think of myself as straight, but the kind of default is that I'm going to be straight. And then one day I realize, I'm gay. So if I think gay men are flamboyant, they're fairies, they're feminine, they're silly, whatever negative or just stereotypical things, I think, then all of a sudden I'm part of that group. And so that gets kind of directed inwards. Same thing goes for a disability. I think in one of our disability episodes, we already mentioned this, there's some statistic, which I'm forgetting now, like 1/4 of us.
Most people will become disabled at some point in their life.
Will have some kind of disability. And that relates to age as well. So, those of us who are lucky enough to survive to an older age, well, if you have biases against old people, ultimately that's going to be you. And so the bias becomes this negative cognitive pattern against yourself, which can lead to depression. And in fact, there's a lot of good research on this. There's one particular study I'm thinking of. They measured kind of implicit or automatic anti-age bias when people were a bit younger. The people who had more negative associations, more negativity towards old people, when they got older, they actually had much worse health outcomes across a variety of measures, not just depression, but also physical health outcomes. And so these are other reasons to work on our biases, both in terms of, hey, some of these biases that you could become a member of that group, work on them so that you don't have some of these negative effects, but also helping people think like, as we go throughout the world and maybe express biases, very often unintentionally, it has negative effects for other people's mental health as well.
Absolutely. I think it's a really good point too of, I don't think I've ever necessarily explicitly thought about it in that way, right? That these internalized negative thoughts that maybe we have about a particular group, especially one that you can become a part of at any point in your life. How that impacts you once you do become part of that community. And I would imagine that not only does that impact just your kind of general mental health, but I would imagine if compared to others, that it probably impacts you even more than.
Because Black folks, they learn some coping skills to deal with racism throughout their whole lives. Hopefully their parents may be preparing. But then if you have essentially just been a member of the powerful group, and if you're a white person and a man and all that, and you don't have any reason to learn some of those things, and then becoming a member of a stigmatized group, it's all of a sudden you're facing all this stuff that you've maybe never wrestled with before.
Absolutely.
And also these kind of in-group biases can be perpetuated within the group. So the LGBT community, this happens a lot, like ideas of what gay men are, quote, supposed to be like. We're, supposed to be fashionable and into shopping and liking, divas and drag queens and so on. Some of those become cultural things that as outsiders, because everyone who's LGBT at one point didn't realize it, we learn these biases and assumptions about the group. And then we're in the group and it starts becoming those shoulds. Like Sandy was saying, don't should all over yourself. I need to be fashionable because I'm gay. I need to be into theater because I'm gay. And those things are especially strong because of this kind of transition into the stigmatized group that some groups face.
It's interesting. I'm reminded of, and I think we talked about it last season as well, but I think it is the documentary called "Do I Sound Gay?" I think that's what it's called.
You talked about that during the Gator episode.
Yeah. But even that, right? Like what I'm supposed to sound like, right? Like the whole documentary is about how this man's voice kind of shifted, and there was
he did it on purpose.
He did, like I don't think it was conscious or totally purposeful at some point, but as he started sitting with it with his therapist and figuring out like, I think I did purposefully change that my voice so that I kind of signaled to others that I was gay and that that there was a need for me to do that, right? So that anyway, it just reminds me. So it was May 2024 episode number 12 is when we talked about that. But yeah, that's what it just reminds me of that. Like these things that we sometimes even do intentionally or even unintentionally to shift when we do become part of that group.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing, this applies across various groups, including getting us back to BIPOC folks. There's this concept called attributional ambiguity. And so when we think about different types of bias, on this podcast, we emphasize a lot unintentional kinds of bias. But also we can think about more overt, like actual hateful, racist people, the KKK and so on. And they actually the research says that there are actually different impacts on mental health and not necessarily the way the listeners might imagine. So what the research shows is when someone is overtly hateful, it has an impact, of course. But by and large, people can dismiss it because it's like that person is just a jerk. That person is a horrible, hateful person. And so it doesn't really reflect anything on me if I'm the target of the bias, or if it's racist thing on the person of color. It's not to say it doesn't have any impact, but they're overall able to kind of reject it as that person was a jerk. However, when it's more implicit kinds of biases or unintentional kinds of biases, very often it's ambiguous. And this is the term attributional ambiguity. So a more unintentional kind of bias, it leaves people kind of questioning, like, wait, what did they mean that to sound racist? Or wait, am I being too sensitive? Maybe it wasn't that. And then they end up kind of ruminating on it more and worrying, like, oh gosh, am I being judgmental towards that person when really they didn't say anything wrong? It's ambiguous. The attribution, how they can attribute the incidents to whether it's racism or not racism or what, is ambiguous. That ends up having a much bigger effect on Black folks' mental health, other people of color's mental health, LGBT folks, this ambiguity. And the ambiguity is more often from these kinds of unintentional biases.
For sure. And we touched on that a little bit. I think it was in the Black History Month episode with Bernie. But yeah, I mentioned that especially when I'm recruiting folks or talking to kind of transplants, BIPOC transplants in Oregon in particular, that we come across that a lot, both in just like everyday life as well as in our workplaces. But there's this kind of it's much more covert, I think, and we come across it a lot, particularly outside of Portland and in Oregon, that there's this kind of you would think there's kind of lip service to diversity and wanting to be welcoming and all of these things. And then all of a sudden there's these undercutting comments or things that then make us question, like you said, that something about that didn't feel right. And it feels racist, or it feels like this was because I'm Black, and but I don't know what to do with that. Like maybe it's not. Maybe it's not really a race thing. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe this is just my perception. And then when you're also in spaces where you don't have other people that look like you to kind of, again, ground yourself in maybe some sense of reality of like, that was that, then you're constantly questioning, and then it makes you feel like you can't trust your own self, right? And that you don't know yourself well enough, or that you can't trust your emotional reactions and sense of things, right? And whether it's intentional gaslighting or not, but there's just that like, oh no, that wasn't because of you.
And it's the ambiguity,
right?
We don't like ambiguity as a species. We want to figure out it was this or it was that.
And I think I'm sorry, just to add into that it's not that much of an add-in, but that we'll probably talk more about that with Pet to Threat as well, because I think that's some of those kinds of things come up when we talk about that in a future episode, next episode, I think actually.
Next episode we were planning to talk about that. Absolutely. And so with this attributional ambiguity, this is something I really want to emphasize. And this is kind of my last major point under the topic, because then we really want to get to how do we heal from this? What are some of those techniques and tools? But this attributional ambiguity thing, I really want to emphasize it both for people who are the targets of bias, and I want you to think about that, and the people who might be expressing bias.
Right.
Because we talk a lot about how when you say something, you don't mean it. Sometimes you freeze up and you don't acknowledge it.
Right.
Because if you remove that ambiguity for others, if I say something that's unintentionally racially biased towards you, let's say, and I catch myself and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. I apologize. It removes the ambiguity because I'm doing the work of recognizing this was a bias. bias. It's not what I meant. It's not what I feel or believe about you. And so it won't have that same impact because you wouldn't have been left with the ambiguity. Like, oh, like, exactly. So I really want all of our viewers to think about that in terms of them as being potential sources of bias towards whatever potential group. But then also for members of those groups, if you recognize how this ambiguity could negatively affect you, we can work on some techniques for just kind of letting it go or coping with it. And I'm looking to Amber for this. I want us all to understand this ambiguity can really have mental health impacts, and we want to try to move away from that or be better at coping with it.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting thought there about like, how do we, when there is that ambiguity, what do we do with it? And I do think that on one hand, it is, going back to what is the intention here, like questioning intention.
The intention of the person who maybe
expressed something. And what does it mean for me to either like ask the question, like, when you said that, like we talked about the ouch, right? Or the oops, and calling that out directly, and or stepping back and finding those spaces where you can get, your community support about like, let me just hear somebody else. What was your perspective on this? Because sometimes we can, overemphasize something, and somebody within my community can be like, girl, this is what this, from when I hear this is what I see or hear. And that's important too, right? Like kind of that reality testing in some of those things.
And that says it's not just you, because that's part of that. Am I being sensitive? Am I being, and someone else being, I'd see it the same way. Is like, okay, this is not just me being subjective.
Right. Or no, girl, you are being sensitive. Right. Like this is, I would feel it this way. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So when we think about like ways in which to support mental health, particularly for BIPOC folks. So I've alluded to this a couple of times. That I wrote, I think it was published as an interview because I wrote too much, so they couldn't publish it as a paper. But an interview called "Catching My Breath in the Age of I Can't Breathe," and I came up with an acronym because I love a good acronym, which is why I wanted us to make sure that we talked about MATE specifically.
Motivation, awareness, tools, effort over
which
time, we can use in this context with what we're looking at. We're motivated and aware of the impact on mental health, and let's get some tools, which is what we're doing now. So
here's the tools. The acronym that I use is SAFETY. So I think about creating like, when we're talking about mental health or suicidal ideation and things like that, or anytime that somebody's like not doing well, we talk about creating a safety plan. And so when I think about safety, specifically when it comes to BIPOC mental health, it stands for soul care, self-care. And I know in our past episode last season, I think it was like the last episode, we talked about wellness overall.
Second to last episode,
the penultimate episode. And I have this affinity towards using the term soul care rather than self-care, because I think that self-care tends to be so focused on detaching from others, and that's not always what we need to kind of tend to our soul. And I've actually moved towards even another iteration of that, which is soul attunement rather than soul care. And the reason I moved towards that language is because out of a conversation with a friend of mine, and I might have mentioned her before as well, Dr. Alette Coble-Temple, who has CP, and she was talking about like, the same reaction you have to self, I have to care, because when I hear the word care, I think immediately of caretakers or being taken care of, and that's not what we're trying to elucidate here. So this idea of soul attunement, like we're attuning to our soul and internal nourishment. Exactly. So really thinking about, what do I need? How do I tend to my mind and my body and my soul care needs, attunement, nourishing needs? So that includes like our sleep and our eating and, all of the things that we need to kind of nourish ourselves. Also, A stands for asking for help. So don't feel like you need to do it all on your own, right? Again, even just like when we're saying when there is that ambiguity, seeking other people's thoughts and advice to kind of ground and test that reality, ask for help, seek culturally appropriate care and like therapeutic services. There's a lot of directories out there to help people guide, because I'm Black and I'm a psychologist. And even for me, trying to find a culturally specific or a person of color that's a therapist is really, really challenging. And so there are a few directories out there. So like Therapy for Black Girls, there's Latinx Therapy, Asian Mental Health Collective. So there are a few out there that you can research and they'll find and help you find some like specific therapists that deal or work with your community.
And it's a nice benefit post-COVID as well, because COVID forced us all to figure out how to do these things online and through Zoom. So even if you're a Black person in Portland where there aren't a lot of Black people, you can find a Black therapist who's maybe somewhere else and still have a fulfilling, full relationship with that therapist.
Right. And that's licensed in your area. Like it just has expanded so many options for you, which has been, if we were to say there's a benefit from COVID, that being one of them, right? Yeah. There's more, the reach is wider, which is great. So S being soul care or attunement, A for ask for help, F being find community, which I've already talked about. Like the need to be around other people that look and have similar identity markers to you is an incredibly important for your mental health. Especially if you identify strongly with certain identity markers, right? Like if you're Black and you don't identify super strongly with that community, that might not be that helpful. But if you have a really strong affinity and connection to your specific identity markers, find community that also share those community markers or those identity markers, because again, that's going to help ground you. It's going to help you with reality testing. It is going to give you a sense. It also gives you this place where you don't have to explain yourself, right? Like, I can be with a group of folks, Black folks, and I can just say about a thing that happened at work, and I don't have to say anything more. And they were like, "Oh my gosh!" They get some of the the nuance that I don't have to then explain all the context to somebody else, why that might be impacting me. So find community. E stands for engage in social activism, which I also talked about before as well, that these ways it's kind of like talking about finding the places where you can have some control, right? Like I might not be able to control all of systemic racism, right?
Probably not.
I can't change all of that, but where are the places in which I can engage with and influence within my my realm of control. And when I can do those kinds of things, especially when I am maybe part of the mental health impacts that I have is being subject to all of these things. How can I find ways that is, whether that's voting or that is giving information towards policies and things like that, or creating a nonprofit like what I've done with my friend and partner. Those kinds of things give us this sense of, one, not just giving back, but taking control and knowing like, okay, I can make change, even if that's going to help my own mental health, but it's also giving back and helping others, their own mental health too. T stands for tend to your whole essence. So a lot of times when we are experiencing stress, we're going through anything major, we tend to think of ourselves only as that single identity, that one identity marker, and to the exclusion of every other part of yourself, right? So if I cut out if I'm in a racist place or I'm experiencing something, or if I go back to thinking about just post George Floyd, when there's all this heightened awareness around what it means to be Black in America, if I cut out all of the other parts of myself and I'm only focusing on what it means to be Black in America, it's really distressing, right? And then that's the only part of me that I'm tending to and making sense of. So of course, the stress that that's going to cause takes up all of my mind space. So what I mean about tending to your whole essence is making sure that you're looking at yourself as, I'm not just a Black woman. I'm also a daughter. I'm a sister. I am a psychologist. I am a creative. I'm a podcaster. I'm all of these other things. And so how do I intentionally invest in these other parts of myself so that I'm not overemphasizing? This is not to diminish what's happening in this part of your life, but it's to say that I am more than just this one thing. I have to be intentional about putting time and energy and investing, reclaiming things that I've let go of because this area of my life has become so stressful. Or let's say your work, right? Like, and I've been there myself, that like my work is causing me a lot of stress. And then all of a sudden I've cut out all of my fun things, all of the other parts of my life to just kind of focus in and think about my work. And then every other area of my life becomes affected because I've become single-minded about this one part of my identity or one part of my life. So really tending to your whole self, your spiritual self, if you have spiritual practices, leaning into making time for your creative endeavors, those kinds of things is going to be really, really important. Those things
recharge you.
Absolutely. They recharge you and they bring you back to yourself, right? Bring you back to more than just the singular identity. And then the last one is why. And I say yank the plug, and yank the plug, meaning thinking about how do I engage in mindful isolation or mindful isolation from like external things like media or things that might be heightening some of that anxiety or the stress around certain identities and things. So really taking the time to be with yourself, right? Like I'm going to disconnect from media. I'm going to disconnect from those kinds of things and reconnect in other places. So just to recap, the acronym is SAFETY, SAFETY, soul care, ask for help, find community, engage in social activism, tend to your whole self, and yank the plug to engage in mindful isolation. So there's lots of things that you can be doing. I also recommend therapy and thinking about mental health, particularly for BIPOC folks. I can't mention this. We can't have this conversation without also at least acknowledging the internal kind of cultural bias against psychological help and mental health. And so I do believe that we're starting to shift and change. Our world is shifting and changing. Cultures are shifting and changing to be more accepting of psychological support and mental health. But I also recognize that like there's a lot of work to be done in certain communities to accept therapy and therapeutic supports.
I think in just about every community.
And every community
who have some bias against mental health.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mental health therapy.
So, and again, that's why I think finding culturally specific and appropriate care that those folks know what those stigmas might be, that might be members of your community, can really help you when you are starting to seek those services.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It doesn't help that every sitcom in the 90s was dead set on referring to every therapist ever as a quack. Like,
right.
Talk about stereotyping.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yep. We have lots of that cultural inertia of things.
Yeah. I hate pretty much every portrayal I see of a therapist, or I mean, I'm not a therapist, as the listeners know, but if you think therapy is what you see on TV as therapy, it's mostly not.
Right.
It really isn't. It's, someone who's an expert in how your brain works, how your life can impact your emotional states, and they're generally good at kind of helping you develop tools and skills, like we focus on this podcast, to shift things in more positive ways.
Right. And sometimes it takes some time to find the right person. So if I were to also just throw this out there too, if you're thinking about or considering finding a mental health therapist, counselor, social worker, psychologist, please know that it's about the right fit, and not everybody's going to be the right fit for you. So it's okay if it takes a few times to find the right person. You have to kind of dedicate yourself to trying some folks on until you find the right one that feels like, yes, they get me, they see me, they're giving me interventions and having conversations that are actually moving me forward. So it's okay to break up with them. They know, this is where we know that you're trying us out. and please, don't get discouraged if the first person that you meet is I don't really I didn't like that. That didn't feel good. Okay. Give it a couple of sessions, because the first couple are a lot of paperwork and things like that. But then after that, give yourself permission to try somebody else until you find somebody that you click with. And
also echoing something we've said before about, it was about finding an immigration lawyer, actually, but word of mouth.
Yep.
So talk to your friends, colleagues who maybe seek mental health. They might know therapists that they've used in the past or currently use that would be good for you.
Yep. And we're bound to confidentiality. So if you go to your friend's psychologist or a therapist, they're not going to be telling you about your friend's stuff, and they're not going to tell your friend about any of your stuff. So that's important to know too.
Also important for word of mouth is that's how people find new podcasts. So
little self-promotion here.
So if you like this podcast, you listen to it, recommend it to others. Do a little share one of our posts from one of our socials on your social media and say, hey, check this out. You can learn some skills, because that helps us out.
That's great.
That's my little tangent. All right. So we'll take a little break and then we'll come back with story time.
Excellent.
Hey everyone! We now have Diverse Joy merch available for purchase. There are Diverse Joy mugs that are dishwasher and microwave safe, some really nice large tote bags that are great for grocery shopping, very cozy embroidered hoodies, and a variety of comfy t-shirts. Whenever Amber or I wear one of our Diverse Joy shirts, people comment on how it makes them excited to see something related to joy and diversity. People are hungry for joy around diversity topics. So get some merch and help us spread the joy. We also made a PDF of free downloadable cards for Diverse Joy Bingo. You won't win any prizes, but it can be fun to play as you watch or listen to an episode. Get all of these at biashabit.com/store, or just go to diversejoy.com and click the store link. All proceeds go toward helping us produce the show, and you can also make a donation to our nonprofit through the site to help us out even more. Now, back to the show.
All right. Well, welcome back. And we will move right into our next segment, which is our stories. And Will, you've got a couple stories for us.
I do. So as always, we start with more negative story, time when someone expressed bias, maybe. And this time it's a story where I expressed bias.
Oh, what? But you're a bias researcher, Will.
It happens to us all. And to pretend otherwise would be to do a disservice.
Yes.
So this was a while ago. I think it's something part of the story is I know better now. Yes. But so many years ago, I was a young graduate student, just in the first couple of years of my career studying bias, but very fascinated in how prejudice plays out and all the different kind of types of bias and stereotypes and lived experiences. So this was at an after bar or after party. So like after bar time, like it was on the weekend with a bunch of gay friends. And I was specifically talking with two Black gay friends. And one of them kind of expressed kind of some dejection or was a bit upset that he was having a hard time in the dating community, dating pool.
I feel that one.
And specifically was saying things along the lines of, you know, he encounters lots of guys who kind of aren't into him because he's Black. So some racism there. And I was very sympathetic and interested, and I believed him. But as a scientist, I was very fascinated to understand exactly how it happened. Like, what's going on? Like, how do you know? How do you know that it was race and not just they're just not into you or because of what your career is or who knows? How do we know it was race? And so you know, the way I just presented it has a little more nuance than what I actually said. I'm characterizing my intent, and we talk a lot about the difference between intent and impact. They don't always mesh. What I said was, how do you know? Kind of a little more bluntly. How do you know it's about race? And the other Black gay friend, who's one of my favorite people in the world, kind of was like, you can't say that, or some version of that. Like that's offensive. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? Like, I'm just fascinated. I want to know. I'm a scientist who does the da da da. And he's like, well, think about how many times we get asked, how do you know? And someone's trying to say, you just think it's about race. It's not really about race. And they're questioning it. And I mean, I was asking a question. I didn't intend to be questioning that it was about race. I was just very interested. But he helped me see, like, oh, of course. Like, of course, that's how it sounds. That's how the impact is. And that ties into one of our skills about adopting a cumulative perspective. It's not like that's probably the 100th time he's had a question like that. And what we were talking about with attributional ambiguity, like having to explain the context, for instance. And so I had a negative impact potentially on his mental health, but I do think the three of us, we talked it through, and I apologized, and we especially the friend who called me out. He's still one of my favorite people in the world. But it goes to show, you know, doesn't matter if you're a bias researcher. You can make missteps, and we all make missteps all the time, even related to things that aren't about bias. And it's about fixing it, apologizing if you've done some kind of harm to someone else, even if it was unintended, and then doing better next time. Like I learned that night at like 3 a.m. after partying all night, I learned, kind of a how do you know question isn't the right way to go about something like that. And so I categorize it as a negative story as time I expressed bias, but I did learn from it.
You learned from it. And again, I think that nobody's perfect, right? We're all going to make a misstep. And
nobody's perfect.
I know nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. I can't even say it. Right. But like, and all we can ask for is being able to acknowledge when we've made a miss, or as somebody who receives something like that, all I ask for maybe it's a better way of saying is that somebody can acknowledge that and then do what they can to correct it and for in the moment, and do what they can to respond to that and hopefully learn larger lessons moving forward.
Yeah.
And, which you did.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are always better ways to do things. Sometimes slightly better, sometimes much better. But like we're always revising and figuring things out for ourselves.
Absolutely.
So and with one another. Like I also, one thing to emphasize about that story, I really appreciate the kind of coming together across the three of us. It wasn't the person who I kind of directly questioned who then called me out. It was the third party who also has the kind of shared community of being Black and gay. That, you know, rather than the person who I asked, like, oh, how do you know, having to kind of defend himself, we had our other friend come in, and I think that makes it easier and a better dynamic as well. So having each other's backs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, being able to stand up, and especially if it's not towards you specifically, being able to stand up and speak out, not in a like white savior perspective, but like you see something happen and you can be the one to speak up about it and say like, hey, I wonder how that impacted. And that's one of the ways that I do this is I wonder how that impacted that person, you know, or like, if I heard it this way, I wonder if they felt the same way.
Yeah. And it definitely, I used that to make sure I do speak up about similar things. And then, of course, that's my job as a diverse joy, biased skill teacher, scientist practitioner. But like, I know I've been in similar circumstances where someone had, how do you, and I'm like, let's think about how we're asking that question and how it feels.
Yeah.
And, you know, let's take people's word for it. It's not a scientific study right now. It's their experience.
Yeah, exactly. That's good. That's really good. Yeah.
Cool.
And how about our positive story?
So
other
story,
flip side of the coin.
Other story. So this one has a negative bit of bias at the beginning and then ends up really positive.
Yeah.
A different sort of bias altogether. So this is actually a story that happened to my dad. And so my dad, he was in the Army for many, many years, was a retired Army lieutenant colonel. And so that's a big part of his identity. And at some company he was working at, in his office, he had kind of memorabilia. So things that have like American flags on them and stuff from his military career, something that's a big source of pride for him.
Heart. Yeah, for sure.
And this bias was kind of against him because of that. So there was someone at his workplace who really took issue with him having American flag memorabilia, and his kind of military stuff in his office.
Yeah.
And said that it was creating a hostile working environment because he has so many American flags. And it was something that like kind of hurt my dad's feelings, and he didn't really understand at the time. But because the workplace kind of took the complaint seriously, they asked him to take everything down. And so, you know, and our offices for all of us, you know, we personalize them, especially, you know, it
reflect us. Yep.
And have, you know, positive feelings for ourselves. And I think that on this podcast is something we would generally support.
Right.
So this was a sad thing for my dad, that he was kind of accused of creating kind of a hostile working environment by something that I don't think any of it was actually political per se.
Right.
It was just, American flags. But years later, before he told me this story, he came across some article, and I believe it was by a Black woman who it was something along the lines of what the American flag means to me.
Yeah.
And she talked a lot about the kind of ambiguity and the complicated feelings she had about it, where sometimes if people are kind of too upfront with American flags, it made her feel like, oh, this person is a little too gung-ho and might be hostile towards me. And he really he read this article and kind of really thought about it. He was like, oh, to me, I just see it and I see this source of pride for me, something where I served my country in the military and all of this. But other people see it differently. Yeah. And came to a new understanding from reading and taking someone else's perspective seriously. And really thinking it through. It's like, now I kind of understand where... And I mean, I'll say for about the person who kind of had that problem with my dad's flags, I feel similarly sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes I kind of worry if you're too gung-ho about the American flag, I'm like, oh, this person might be anti-gay or something like that, because it's one of these things that in culture has started to become a symbol for something more than what it's supposed to be. Right. So, but the reason this is a positive story, my dad really kind of learned and was like, oh, I realize where that person was coming from now. Yeah. And I think it was years apart from when the thing happened to when he looked back at it. And then, he shared that story with me and Roman when we were, on a cruise with him and my mom, actually. So that's my positive story that, even if things, happen later, you can learn more, learn differently. Like, I don't have a perfect solution to this, because I kind of feel like I don't think he should have had to take them down, or maybe keep some, or I don't know. Yeah, it's a tricky line, right? Because this is kind of another story, but there's one of the things that happened in my area. Part of the reason we started my nonprofit was the school board kind of made a ban on all things that were BLM and pride flags. So any kind of memorabilia that was that.
essentially stating the same thing, that they couldn't have BLM or pride flags because it was
BLM is Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter, excuse me. Yes. Because it made other people feel it was political and that it was causing a hostile environment for the students. But they didn't do it for the American flag, but a lot of those same the students that might have been waving BLM or pride flags felt similarly about American flags. So it is an interesting thing. But I really appreciate that he was able to sit with, okay, now I understand how or why somebody may have been reacting to this from their perspective, that I do not have that same association with these emblems or these signifiers like the American flag. It also reminded me of this interaction, this interview actually, about a Black person interviewing somebody who had a ton of Confederate flags displayed.
Very different symbols.
Very different symbols, but all these Confederate flags on their lawn in their house, and they came and were like, "Oh, can you tell me about the Confederate flags?" And they were talking about Southern pride and a bunch of other things. And they had this really beautiful conversation, and the Black person just kind of sat and listened, and then was like, "Can I share? Can I share what it means? Like how I perceive it, and how what it means to me?" And it was just this really beautiful cross dialogue where the person who had all of these flags displayed was able to say like, "Oh, I see how that is what kind of negative impact that has on other people. Even though this is about me and my source of pride, I can see how that level of pride can make you feel scared and harmful, that has some harm on you."
I kind of wonder, so like kind of you and I right now workshopping a solution for, my dad in the past. Again, we'll hop in a time traveling TARDIS later and let's see if we can help him out. Like, what if it were the American flag paired with pride flag, BLM? I think this was before Black Lives Matter, but because if I recognizing that I kind of have a reaction sometimes when I see an American flag because of some of these associations. Yeah. But if it were paired with something else, like the idea that these people who are very flag forward are maybe anti-gay or potentially racist or whatever, which I don't think it's not a fair jump necessarily, but it's a reaction we both we both have. But if there was something else, just to reassure that it's not that, you can have this pride in the United States and symbols supporting other things, would that make it better?
I think it would. It reminds me, and I'm sure I've shared this before because it's my favorite quote. And one of the things I talk about so often when it comes to diversity conversations and things like that is, one, I have to recognize my impact on other people, how I present, right? Yeah. Whether it's, again, my intention or not. I know I'm a verbal processor, for instance, right? So I talk a lot. And sometimes I say things that sound like a statement when it's not really a statement. It's just like the first thought that's in my mind. And I'm trying to work out what I actually believe until I get there, right? And I have to recognize what that means. Or I can be very boisterous in spaces, and that can be off-putting to people. And I need to acknowledge and recognize that impact, right? And Audre Lorde has this quote that says, "If I did not define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's perceptions of me and eaten alive." Yep. And for me, what that means is, again, recognizing that, like, if somebody sees me or hears me or is interacting with me, how different ways in which they might perceive that or project onto those pieces. And so in the same way with the flag, like, if I can be aware of the different perceptions of the American flag, and I know that that is not how I see the flag or how I interact with it, how can I intentionally mitigate the potential harm of saying, like,
or
adding
in perception.
Difference in perception of saying, like, okay, if I know that, like, this might signal to people that I'm, anti-gay or I'm anti-Black or whatever, maybe I can put other things with it that would signal like, yeah, I love America, or I'm a vet, or I'm this, and I support
gay troops,
and I support these, I support Black lives, and I support these things. That gives a much more nuanced perception of
I'm thinking
people.
of like bumper stickers now. Like you got your whatever military or flag bumper sticker, but then also put like if it's my dad, I love my gay son, or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And those that relates to one of the skills we had in a recent episode of broadening your input through images in the environment. You're not leaving it up to people's interpretation or the ambiguity. Going back to that, you're just stating like I support. I believe that Black lives matter. I support love is love. Those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
And also support the troops or have pride in that as well.
Absolutely. 100%. I actually really like that because I think I've talked about that a lot when it comes to how I'm telling people about myself. But I think it's from our input, our images and things like that, that there's lots of ways that we can be doing that and being intentional about not allowing other people to see us through a singular lens too.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that was my flag story, really, because it's July, so 4th of July month. So happy Independence Day, people in the U.S. Yes. And those were our stories.
Excellent.
All right. So next, we have an audience question. So this was sent in by one of Amber's colleagues, and it's going to be framed in terms of kind of research data, but I think our conversation will go beyond that a little. So as researchers, we often present data about, like Amber did at the start of this episode, of rates of mental health issues in various communities. But also sometimes we present data about just any prominence of different kinds of behaviors or things like that. So the question is, how or what should we consider when presenting data or leading discussions about groups that we don't belong to? So for instance, if you're a straight researcher, educator, or person talking about the LGBT community, or a white person presenting data on people of color, those sorts of things. Like, what are some of the considerations and how do we go about that, making sure that it's respectful and we're not just exacerbating stereotypes or our own assumptions. And Amber, you're going to get us started, and I have some thoughts as well.
Yeah. Well, I think, as somebody who's been in academia, both from a data standpoint and clinical standpoint, this is something that comes up a lot. And one of the things that I talk about, or I think of immediately, is also being really conscientious of my positionality and being very clear about, like, here's my background and also my connection to the community or the population, whether I'm an in-group or not, but like, I do this research, I work with this population, I'm connected to it, or however, like, what is my connection to the population, and how much, and really being very explicit about the care and attention that you're paying to how you're holding and handling this, and that this is also informed by input from people that are part of that group, part of that population. That it's not just my interpretation of somebody else's experience.
Absolutely, and in science, we always are working on getting our subjectivity out of the process. But I think this is a place where it's especially important. And so I even had in my notes almost exactly what you just said. Make sure you at least read up on or discuss with members of that group. Like, how do they think about these issues generally? How do they think? Because, as much as we scientists love to believe that we're discovering some great new thing, in the study of human behavior, someone else has already probably talked about this issue. And I bet members of that community have had opinions about it at the very least. So consider those. Even if you're not able to personally talk to someone, at least read up. The internet is full of people talking about stuff.
There are quotes, there's other papers.
And with that, one of the skills we've talked about previously, listen with humility. Both in terms of before you kind of pull together a presentation on something and after, because maybe you've done as much care and careful work as possible, but someone might still have a reaction.
Absolutely.
That you need to listen to with humility. And it's not, their reaction is valid. valid, whatever it is. It might not invalidate the data or something, but you need to listen to how they're receiving what you've said and figure out if maybe there's a different way to say it. Well, do you have more on that before I have one more big thing?
I think that's one of the biggest things. And, we talked about previously amplifying voices too. Yes. And so in the same way, not only just hearing it from, but we're also amplifying, we're bringing those things in and talking about my own, again, when I say talk about your own positionality and where you sit within this, but also your own, which we've modeled several times, our own missteps or our own interactions with this data and how I perceived it initially or what my initial thoughts were and how this new data or this information shifts and changes how I interact with it or interact with this population. Yep. Again, really positioning yourself within this data, not centering yourself, but recognizing and allowing the audience to understand what perspective you're coming from and how they can then do the same thing with this information.
Yeah. And think about kind of an audience's worst possible interpretation of what you're saying, and then make sure you provide appropriate context. So what we started with today, that people of color have kind of worse mental health and maybe less seeking of mental health services, one could interpret that as, well, people of color are mentally weak. But we provided the context of they're facing prejudice, they're facing oppression. There are these stressors built into society that are, at least in part, and I think in large part, the cause of some of these things. Providing that kind of cultural context for the people you're talking about, to the extent that you can, is helpful. Don't leave it to people's kind of worst possible interpretations. And closely related to that is to watch out for what we call a deficit approach. So, for instance, if we're comparing men and women, let's say, we could say, if they're different on some kind of scale, we could phrase it as, oh, well, women are worse on this, or men are better on this. And much more often, we tend to emphasize the stigmatized group being lower, worse, not as well off on something. That's adopting a deficit approach related to that. You also need to think about the other side of the group. Maybe it has something to do with the more dominant group. And this is something that I dealt with a lot with that gaydar research that I talked about over a year ago, I think now. We had that original episode. But there's all this research related to what people call the sexual inversion theories of homosexuality. Basically, the idea of gay men are feminine and lesbians are masculine. Without going on a long tangent about it, it really sets up this situation where basically what masculinity or femininity, I'll just stick with men for the moment, masculinity ends up getting defined as whatever straight men do. So if straight men are doing something, that is the definition of masculine behavior. And so then if gay men do anything different, that's considered less masculine. But everything is set up so that whatever it is straight men are doing, it's more masculine. And then there's a gay deficit approach where we're doing something weird, inverted. And like this idea of sexual inversion, I mean, it was a major factor in the Holocaust and was used to persecute and as a reason for a rallying cry for the Nazis against gay folks, gay men especially. And thousands were murdered. And so it's become a hot button thing. But then we have some researchers who are kind of like, oh yeah, gay men are kind of gender inverted. And it's like, well, are there different ways to talk about it? And in one, this is a peer review I did. I was like, well, can we frame this as what's wrong with straight people? So I was being sassy. I also wouldn't recommend doing it exactly like that. Like what actually happens when you look at the data. Gay men and lesbians have much more variability. So they're both more masculine and more feminine when we find ways of defining that, which again, they're often defined by what straight people do, which I don't agree with. But basically, as we said in a previous episode, also LGBT people go through a coming out process. They question norms, and we're more likely to violate norms in many directions. And really, the thing that actually explains gender expression and data more is that straight people don't do that as much. So straight men in general are much more restricted in their gender expression.
Right.
And so they end up looking kind of very limited in what they do. And then gay people are just more comfortable breaking out of that. And so you could create a whole story about, gosh, what's wrong with straight people? Why are they so stuck on norms? Why are they so afraid to
explore more?
Why don't they break gender norms? And actually the coming out process is part of that. And we can make a whole story that says, what's wrong with straight people? Why aren't they more like gay people? Maybe the way gay people is better. Straight people are so, entrapped by gender norms. And I'm not advocating for that approach either. That's a straight deficit approach, saying there's something wrong with them. But there's a better way than assuming that there's something wrong with the gay people. We can say, both and, as you always love to say, bingo, diverse joy, bingo. So I say really watch out for the deficit approaches. We can talk about what's going on in both groups and the potential positive and negative aspects of both without resorting to language that isolates, especially the less powerful group.
Right. That's great. Thank you.
All right. So that was our question. And now I'll take another little break for us.
All right. So welcome back from break. And as we round out our episode, we will end with our skill and joy. But what is our habit-breaking skill for this episode? Well,
right, everyone.
We don't end on the skill.
There's skill and joy. Skill and joy. I said joy too.
Last two things: skill, then joy.
Our penultimate part.
So today's this episode's habit-breaking skill is focused around retraining reactions. This is something we visited before, but it was a long time ago, and we actually had people kind of send in suggestions and ideas of revisiting it. So we talked about this in the second time Sandy was here when we talked about trans and non-binary issues. But basically, we kind of have our kind of default habitual way of responding, which often is going to reflect bias. We have these bias habits.
Right.
And we want to retrain those into cognitive patterns and habits that are more in line with our intentions.
Right.
And I have this mnemonic device, and this was also kind of drawn on a bit of inspiration from cognitive behavioral therapy, like we were talking about earlier. This mnemonic device is detect, reflect, reject. So first you want to detect your automatic response. This can be a bias popping to mind or something that you're saying or doing that you want to change. You need to start tuning into and detecting it. Then you want to bring in your more deliberative, thoughtful cognitive processing. So reflecting on it, like, gosh, what could the impact of this be? Right. How might this create more bias in my decision making? Or, as we talked about today, what might be the impact on someone else? How might this affect their mental health? Maybe pulling in that cumulative perspective on bias would be helpful in how you're reflecting on things. Right. And then if this reaction that you're trying to retrain, if you decide it's not how you want to be, then you reject it. Say, that's not how I want to be. And then bring in some kind of thought or behavior or speech pattern that is more in line with your intentions. So one example modified from something that someone said in. So for instance, if you have a kind of stereotypical thought about someone you see, so let's say you're walking around and you see a black person and maybe have kind of a reaction, like a fear response that we know some people often have, thinking, oh, this person might be dangerous. Think about black people you admire. Think about black professors that you've had. Think about Amber. Think about other people in your life or in the media who is someone, a member of that group that you admire, that you don't associate that kind of fear reaction with. Reminding yourself, of course, not all black people are dangerous or criminal or whatever the assumption is. One way that I've heard people of doing this, so they'll see a black person out in the world who's maybe not dressed very nice, wearing sweats and maybe a little disheveled. And often they'll make an assumption, oh, this is some homeless person. But really, lots of people on the weekends aren't dressed up. I know me, I look pretty slouchy when I'm not trying to present or do a specific event. Imagine, this Black person who's in sweats out, walking around living their life. Maybe they're a professor.
Right.
Maybe they're a rich business owner, and this is the weekend. They're not trying to be well put together and cute. They're just living their life. Yeah. They're just running out to the store to pick something up. Right. And I think we all sometimes are just do that in kind of sweats and things. You can create a fictional but plausible story in your mind to counteract the stereotypic assumptions, which are going to by default be more powerful. So you can detect, I'm having kind of a stereotypical or biased reaction to this person, reflect on it. Like, really, what else could be going on here? Who else could this person be? And you kind of reject that stereotypical notion. We've talked about this, the you guys example that we brought up a few times. This, you guys is a phrase I would use. I started detecting when I was using it. I reflected on, hey, this isn't as gender inclusive as I want to be, rejected it and started saying you all.
Yes.
And I also want to tie it to this notion of attributional ambiguity and kind of mental health stuff we talked about this season. You can recognize if you start detecting yourself being like, was in one of these situations where, was that racist? Was that biased? I'm not sure. Start thinking about the facts about attributional ambiguity. I know if I sit here and dwell on this, it's gonna harm my mental health. Maybe draw on some of the safety things, like talk to a friend who's also a member of that group who can be like, yeah, that was, or no, that wasn't. Yep. Or just accept the ambiguity and just reject it and be like, I don't care anymore. Right. I said that as a statement. Maybe I'm asking that. Do you think that works to just reject it and not think about it anymore? Would that therapeutically be a good way to eliminate ambiguity, or?
Yeah, I think,
or just accept ambiguity. I
think that, it's, and I may have mentioned in an earlier episode, kind of when we think about mindfulness, right? We're not ruminating on a singular thought. We're acknowledging and recognizing the thought that comes in, and we're letting it kind of go by, right? Kind of like if you were to put it on a leaf and let it kind of float down the river, right? Yeah. And we can't necessarily we talk about intrusive thoughts or things like that. Like you can kind of allow it, acknowledge that this was a thought that I had, and then kind of the letting go is allowing it to kind of, we're not sitting there staring at it and examining it, but saying like, and that thought can kind of keep moving through, right? We're letting it blow through. So yes, it's definitely something that we talk about from a mindfulness perspective. And I think that it can be helpful when it comes to those kinds of ambiguous interactions. I think that sometimes it can be hard as a BIPOC person to to necessarily just let that to allow it to just kind of move past. And I see the how it can be really helpful too, to not sit and ruminate on things that might be harmful to us too.
Yeah. And this is also something where I think I've said this a couple times this season. With all these skills, they're for you to apply and use when they're useful for you. Right. So what you're describing right now, I think there's variability for some people. Just the mindful kind of whatever and letting it go might be right for them. For other people, a little bit of more kind of using one of the safety things, like I said, like talking to someone about it would be better for them. Yep. Like everyone has kind of different cognitive styles and ways of going about things. So you can figure out which approach might be right for you. And it might be
different contexts, right? Like in certain contexts where I feel more safe and secure, I might be able to very easily say like, I'm just going to let that go. Like I know this person, or I know the space, or I understand this context differently. And then in some other contexts where maybe there's either more ambiguity, or I don't have as much contextual awareness in that space, maybe I'm going to use a different kind of approach to how I'm holding and maybe retrain, still coming back to this kind of retraining my reaction, but I might come at it from a different angle.
Yeah. And each circumstance could be different as well. So this is what you said. So I'm just, this is a story I'll probably share in some future episode. I know I have it in my bank, but it was ambiguous whether someone was being anti-gay towards me or not. Like someone was really hostile to me, and I really didn't think it was justified, except that I wear this rainbow watch band, and so people will like. I was like, what was my behavior somehow awful? And so I was ruminating on it. This is a person I would never see again. Like we happened to be on a bus together, and they were rude to me, and so for me, and I did ruminate on it for a while, but I'm thinking about it now. Just assuming, yep, they were anti-gay and like whatever, like is probably more mentally healthy for me. Like I'm not going to ever get more information about that situation. I'm never going to encounter that person again. So it's not like it's a coworker where I maybe need to fit, like assuming that they're racist or anti-gay would maybe be problematic for my ongoing. But this is someone I'm never going to have to face again. And so just assuming, they were anti-gay jerks. Screw them. I know people like that exist, and it's not my business. Like that would be more mentally healthy for me. For that circumstance. For sure. So different ways to think about this. Absolutely. And different ways to apply this detect, reflect, reject. Absolutely. The reject could be just letting it float down on the leaf. Right. Or it could, or what have you. Yeah.
Right. And it comes, and I mentioned this earlier too, around the reality testing too. Right. And that's part of that. Like, okay, is there merit to this or is there not? And that's that detecting and reflecting on it.
Yeah. And also with the reality testing, like what would be the case if it were true? What would be the case if it were false? And sometimes the answer to both is it doesn't matter to me anymore. Like it's not going to affect my life into the future unless I keep ruminating on it.
Exactly.
And so it's the rumination that we need to just let go of.
Yep. Absolutely. Anytime we're ruminating on things, it rarely results in positive outcomes. If I'm being honest.
And that's what the research shows. Unless it is kind of actively problem solving.
Right. Yes.
And it's something that you need to problem solve. Like, rumination generally leads to just more depression.
Yeah. Yep. 100%.
All right. So that was our skill. Retrain your actions with that detect, reflect, and reject. Yep. And I think when we're thinking of kind of mental health and the impact of prejudice and bias on ourselves, when we're the targets of it, could be especially useful for a lot of people. And also for retraining our biases that we might be in danger of expressing.
Yep. And I know we're kind of closing out this part, but I'm also thinking about, we talk a lot about CBT, and I've brought in ACT a lot, but also the retraining our reactions reminds me of realigning to our values, such as ACT.
Which stands for acceptance and commitment therapy. Yeah, thinking about what your values are, what's important to you, and then the relevance of the rumination or what?
Retraining our thoughts, right? Retraining our reactions based on our values, right? Okay. And so that's part of my thought is how do we...
Like the you guys thing. Let's say I slip up and say you guys. Oh, gosh, I'm really trying to have more gender inclusive language and not kind of this presumption that everyone's male. So I'm trying to say you all. And even saying that out loud.
Saying it out loud.
Because let's say someone was offended because I said you guys and they're a woman or they're non-binary or whatever. By you then addressing it, you remove that ambiguity. Like, I'm trying not to have that in my language anymore. Exactly. So your impact on someone else can be mitigated by acknowledging that something you said doesn't align with your values.
Right. And for yourself as well, right? Like this is my value. It's not just a behavior I'm trying to change. And it could also just be a behavior trying to change. But
you're changing it because of your values, probably.
Changing because of your values. Exactly. Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So that was our skill today. Now the second piece of bread on our diverse joy sandwich.
Yes.
The joyful recommendation. So Amber has a recommendation for us today.
Yes. And I don't know how we haven't done this recommendation yet, but it is Doctor Who.
Ooh, I love Doctor Who.
We love Doctor Who. Doctor Who has been on for, I'm gonna look to our producer to double check how many seasons and how long it's been on. Do you know off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, if you're
Since,
talking
like,
about
the 50s,
every season,
it's been on for a long time.
there are 26 seasons from the original era of 63 to 89, 14 from 2005 to present, spanning 883 episodes, 97 of which are classified as missing. And 311.
Some of the old ones, they didn't like save the tapes and recordings of them.
I didn't even know that.
Because they didn't do that in television, because television was just a broadcast.
Just kind of a broadcast. Oh, interesting. See, I'm learning so much already. But it is such a... Did you have more?
311 stories, which I believe is the audio dramas that they do.
But for the modern Doctor Who, it's been since 2005. So they're about
14 seasons.
Since 2005.
Yeah. It's the story of a time lord, and they go through time and space and bring, travel companions along the way. And each kind of doctor is a different person or a different body, and kind of a little bit of a different personality as they shift, and they kind of when he or they die, essentially they regenerate into this like new character and this new person. And it's kind of wacky, it's super fun, it's very sci-fi, heartwarming. There's so many really good storylines, and the storylines of the companions that he takes along, or they take along with them as they travel throughout time and space. And sometimes you learn a little something historical, and sometimes it's aliens, and sometimes it's something really historically accurate. It's just really, really fun. And again, the classic ones I have not watched very much of, but the most famous one is Tom Baker, which you've seen. I'm sure most people have seen pictures of Tom Baker, which is the really, really long scarf and the hat. And the current ones, the most current Doctor is Ncuti Gatwa, and who's a Black gay man, and actually is Black and gay on the show, which is really fantastic representation. And the Doctor right before this was Jodie Whittaker, which is the first female or woman presenting Doctor. And so it's just really fun. Yeah. I love it. It is there's just great stories. And in the new Doctor, one of the villains was Jinkx Monsoon, which I love to talk about drag queens.
Bingo.
We got there.
We got there. I was going to bring it around eventually.
And it's on Disney Plus.
It's on Disney Plus.
We got Disney
so here's a couple bingo words for you.
If I may. So if you've never watched Doctor Who, I have a strong suggestion for how to start. Yeah. So this was the first season of Doctor Who I was introduced to, and it's just so good. It's a contained story over one season, and it introduces you to everything you need to be introduced to, and wraps it all up in a perfect bow. It was my first season of Doctor Who, and when I introduced Roman to it, I was like, we start in this season, and he's like, but that's kind of in the middle, and I'm like, just trust
me. Yeah.
So they're British, so they're series, not seasons.
Yes.
Series 5 of the modern Doctor Who. That's the first season with Matt Smith as the Doctor, and they just have such a beautiful and perfect story from start to finish that season that introduces you to everything you need. It starts fresh. You don't need to have prior knowledge.
A whole lot of backstory,
and it will get you so into the characters and so into the whole world. Yeah. Then you can keep watching
villains and everything. Yep.
So we did that. I did that with Roman, and then we watched from there to the modern time, and then went back and watched some of the older, still from the modern series. Yeah. But it's a perfect self-contained season, so highly recommend that one.
Yeah, they're just they all have very special, again, just characteristics and personalities, and everybody kind of has their own favorite, doctor, which one's their favorite. And definitely Matt Smith and David Tennant is one of my favorites, and Ncuti Gatwa is definitely becoming one of my favorites. So it's just really good. And I'm just going to put one more plug about Jinkx Monsoon as a drag queen and also trans woman, which again is just really great representation in Doctor Who. And she's also from Portland, and so lives in neighborhoods not too far from me. So I have a very special place in my heart for Jinkx Monsoon, and I'll just put an extra plug for her. She's now like expanding into Broadway, and so she's been in Little Shop of Horrors in Chicago and doing all kinds of really, really great things. So it's a little tangential plug for Jinkx.
So that was our joyful recommendation. I echo it very strongly. Hurrah. All right. Well, I am Dr. William Cox.
And I'm Dr. Amber Nelson.
Diverse Joy is produced by Eric Roman Binding with music by Jay Arner. It is accessible as a video podcast on YouTube or an audio-only podcast wherever you get podcasts, or at diversejoy.com. Also follow us at Diverse Joy on most social media platforms. If you enjoy the show, help us reach more people by leaving 5-star reviews or recommending it personally. Diverse Joy is the official podcast of Inequity Agents of Change, a nonprofit devoted to evidence-based approaches to reduce bias, create inclusion, and promote equity. All that good Jedi work. Learn more at biashabit.com. Thank you for joining us. Now, go find your joy. Bye.
And speaking of, here are some stats.
Jinkx identifies as non-binary and uses they pronouns when not in drag.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Excellent.
Cool.